The ink, black as a spiteful midnight, was finally dry. I stared at the document on my desk, the single sheet of heavy, cream-laid paper that contained my last and greatest joke. My final, magnificent screw you. They thought I didn't know. They thought old age had sanded down my edges, fogged my windows, turned me into a harmless, doddering relic to be humoured, and then, eventually, plundered. Oh, how wrong they were. I saw it all. I'd seen it 4 years. The name on the will, my name Arthur Denmark Vestergaard, seemed to stare back at me with a grim satisfaction of its own. They hadn't called me Arthur in decades. Not to my face. To my children, I was always just father. A title, not a name. A function, a bank, a deed, a portfolio. But to everyone else, from the guys down at the shipyard, where I made my first million, to the society pages that chronicled my second, I was Denmark. A nickname born from my stubborn, unyielding pride in my heritage, and a personality as solid and unforgiving as the cliffs of M.N.S. Clint. And now, Denmark was about to teach his children a lesson in basic human nature. A lesson their mother, my beloved Clara, would have wept to see necessary. But she was gone. She was the softness in this family, the glue, the heart. Without her, the rot set in. The greed, once a subtle undercurrent, became a tidal wave. They didn't see a father, they saw an asset. They didn't see a legacy, they saw a liquidation. My hand, gnarled and spotted with the map of 84 years, trembled slightly as I traced the embossed letterhead of my lawyer, Old Man Henderson. It wasn't from fear. It was from the pure, undiluted adrenaline of what I was about to unleash. This was my masterpiece, not the shipping empire I built from a single borrowed trawler, not the art collection that curators fawned over, not the patents that still ticked along like little golden clocks. This perfect, beautiful, paradoxical trap. Let me tell you about my children, my 3 masterpieces of avarice. First, there's Astrid, my eldest, the CEO. She runs my old company now, or what's left of it after she streamlined it, selling off the heart and soul for a fatter quarterly report. Astrid has a smile that could frost glass and a calculator where her soul should have been. She was born with a spreadsheet in her cradle. Her love, what little she dispenses, is conditional, transactional. She views this family as a subsidiary that's been underperforming and is long overdue for a hostile takeover. She'd sell the air she breathes if she could find a beer and patent the process. Then there's Bjorn, the middle child, the politician. Oh, he's not an official one, but he should be. He's got the smile, the handshake, the uncanny ability to make you feel like you're the most important person in the room, while he's picking your pocket. Bjorn deals in perceptions. He's a master of the long game, of favours owed and debts called in. Where Astrid sees numbers, Bjorn sees influence. He's always orbiting, a sleek satellite of charm, waiting for the main event to die down, so he can swoop in and claim the most valuable pieces. He thinks he's the smartest person in any room, and his greatest weakness is that he's usually right. But not this time. And finally, there's Clara, my youngest, the victim. At least, that's the role she's chosen for herself. Clara's life is a never-ending opera of minor grievances and major dramatics. She married a useless trust fund poet who needs space to create, which is a fancy way of saying he needs space to spend her allowance. Clara believes the world, and particularly her father, owes her a life of uncomplicated luxury. She didn't get the drive of Astrid or the cunning of Bjorn. She got a bottomless well of want. She's a black hole of need, dressed in cashmere and self-pity. Every conversation is a not-so-subtle negotiation for more, wrapped in a sigh, and there you just don't understand me, father. They're vultures, the lot of them, circling, waiting for the old lion to finally keel over, so they can rip and tear. They've had their lawyers on speed dial 4 years. They've made casual, probing questions about my health, my plans, the specifics of the will. They think they're so subtle. They think him so old. I remember the last family dinner. It was a disaster, like they all are. Alara's grand mahogany table, a thing of beauty she found in Copenhagen, and had shipped over, was littered with the carcasses of her expensive meal and cheap resentments. Astrid was criticizing the wine. "It's adequate, father, but the 95 Lafite would have been a more prudent choice given the occasion." There was no occasion. It was a Tuesday. Bjorn was on his phone, networking, as he called it, just securing a table for the Kensingtons at the gallery opening. "Father, you know how it is. Relationships are the true currency." He didn't look up, and Clara was weeping, silently, of course, for a maximum effect. A single, perfect tear tracing a path through her meticulously applied makeup. "It's just the light in this room is so harsh now. It's not how Mother kept it. It feels so cold, so unwelcoming." This was because it replaced the old drapes. That was the crime. A change of fabric. I sat at the head of the table, watching them, my progeny, my heirs, a cold CEO, a smiling spider, and a professional mourner, and I knew, in that moment, with a certainty that chilled me to my bones, that Elara's greatest fear was coming true. The family she built, the love she nurtured, was gone. It had been replaced by this hollow performance. They didn't love me. They loved what I represented. The key to the vault, the combination to the lock. That was the night the idea was born. The paradoxical will. It came to me not in a rage, but in a moment of crystalline, calm clarity. A joke. A final test. A lesson they would fail. Spectacularly. I called Henderson the next morning. He's been my lawyer, my friend, for 50 years. He's the only one who ever saw me. Denmark. The man, not the monument. When I laid out my plan, he went pale. His hands, usually so steady, shook as he poured us the fingers of single malt. "Arthur," he said, using my real name, a sign of his seriousness. "This is brutal. It's a bomb. It will destroy them." "No, William," I said, sipping the whiskey, feeling the peat smoke burn a familiar, comforting path down my throat. "It won't destroy them. It will reveal them. They've already destroyed themselves. I'm just handing them the mirror. They'll fight. They'll litigate until the sun burns out. They'll never agree." "That's the point," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "The point is the impossibility. The point is the default clause. The default clause. My favorite part. If my beloved children could not reach a unanimous agreement on the division of my entire estate within 1 calendar month of my death, it would all, every stock, every bond, every property, every single cursed painting and piece of silver go to the Vestergaard Foundation for the Arts, a charity I had set up in my wife's name, one that funded music and art programs for underprivileged kids. The one thing my children universally despised, because it didn't benefit them directly. It was perfect. It was elegant. It was, as Astrid would say, the most prudent choice. Unanimity. What a beautiful, vicious word. It sounds so collaborative, so peaceful. It implies harmony, togetherness, a meeting of minds. For my children, it was a death sentence for their inheritance. They couldn't agree on what to order for dessert. They couldn't agree on the temperature of a room. The idea of them agreeing on how to split an empire worth hundreds of millions. It was the funniest thing I'd ever conceived. I signed the will with a flourish, the pen scratching decisively against the paper. It was done. That was 6 months ago. Now, the wait is over. I'm lying in my own bed, in this too big, too quiet house that used to be a home. The smell of Elara's roses is gone from the garden outside my window, replaced by the sterile scent of antiseptic and mortality. The cancer, that insidious little thief, has done its work. It's taken my strength, my appetite, most of my body, but it hasn't taken my mind, and it hasn't taken my grim sense of anticipation. I can feel the end creeping in, a cold tide at the edges of my consciousness, but I'm not afraid. I'm eager. I'm like a playwright on opening night, waiting for the curtain to rise on my final act. I've set the stage. The players are in place, though they don't know their lines yet. They don't know the script ends with their own damnation. I can picture Henderson's face, somber and professional, sitting them all down in this very study. I can see the mahogany desk, cleared of my things, I can hear the rustle of the paper as he produces the will. I can imagine their faces, Astrid's cool calculation, Bjorn's eager charm, Clara's performative grief all freezing, then cracking, then shattering into a million pieces of raw, unvarnished greed as he reads the clause. My estate will be divided equally among my children, provided they can unanimously agree on how to divide it within 1 month. There will be a moment of silence, a beat, then the explosion. Astrid will immediately try to take control. Clearly, the most logical approach is to liquidate all non-core assets and divide the capital into 3 equal trusts. We'll need a full valuation from Bjorn will cut her off, his smile never wavering. Now, Astrid, let's not be hasty. Father's legacy isn't just about cash. There's the house, the art, the company shares. There are sentimental values to consider. I think we should, and Clara will dissolve. The house, mother's house. You can't just liquidate her memory. I need the house. It's all I have left of her. You don't understand the pain. They will talk over each other. They will make proposals and counter-proposals. They will form temporary, treacherous alliances. Astrid and Bjorn might gang up on Clara, trying to bully her into accepting a buyout for her share of the house. Then Bjorn and Clara might ally against Astrid, arguing for the preservation of the family legacy, meaning the things Bjorn can use for social capital and Clara can use as a stage for her grief. Then Astrid and Clara might turn on Bjorn, accusing him of always getting his way through manipulation. They will meet and argue. They will hire their own lawyers, who will send threatening letters to each other. They will scream and cry and negotiate in bad faith. They will see the month ticking away, the clock winding down, and their panic will make them even more irrational, more greedy, more themselves. And they will fail. They will fail because I know them. I created them, in a way. I provided the environment where their worst traits could flourish. I was too busy building an empire to build their characters. Clara tried, God knows she tried, but I was the example they followed. The ruthless businessman, the uncompromising negotiator, the winner. And now, they are simply using the tools I gave them. The ultimate paradox is that my will is a reflection of my own life. I built a fortune on the principle of ruthless competition, of never backing down, of winning at all costs. And now, I'm using that same principle to ensure they lose everything. To win this, my final game, they must do the one thing their upbringing and their natures make impossible. They must cooperate. They must trust. They must be selfless. And they would rather see it all burn than let one of the others get a single penny more than they deem fair. The room is getting darker. The edges are fuzzy. I can hear the distant, muffled sounds of the nurse moving around downstairs. My breathing is getting shallow. A faint, raspy sound in the immense quiet of the room. I am not thinking of my life. I am not thinking of my regrets. There are many, a mountain of them, but they are for another time, another place, where perhaps I can beg forgiveness from Clara. No, right now. I am thinking of the month to come. I am picturing their faces. I am imagining the fury, the desperation, the sheer, unadulterated rage, as they realize the trap is sprung. The old man wasn't senile. The old man was one step ahead. The old man, even from the grave, is still the best businessman in the family. A final, dry chuckle escapes my lips. It sounds like leaves skittering across pavement. Let the games begin. The light is gone now. There is only the sound of a clock ticking down. The silence after my last breath was profound. Not an empty silence, but a thick, expectant one, like the air in a concert hall the moment before the conductor raises his baton. It wondered, in my more philosophical moments, what would come after. A tunnel of light, a celestial jury, the warm embrace of nothingness, or Clara's smile. It was none of those things. It was perspective. I was untethered, a consciousness without a body, a point of view without eyes. I was everywhere in the room at once, and yet nowhere. I could see the nurse, Brenda, her face a mask of professional solemnity as she closed my eyes. I could feel the weight of the starched sheets on the bed I'd just vacated. I could hear the frantic, skittering thoughts of a spider in the corner ceiling web, a creature entirely unconcerned with the passing of a titan. Most importantly, I could see my body. A shell, a husk, a thing of wax and parchment, collapsed in on itself. The mighty Denmark, reduced to a cooling arrangement of calcium and fading warmth. It should have been horrifying. It was, instead, fascinating. The joke wasn't on me. The joke was me, and it was just beginning. The machinery of death began its efficient, soulless whir. Phone calls were made, hushed, urgent. A doctor arrived, confirmed the obvious with a practiced sigh, and signed a form. Brenda, with a tenderness she'd never shown the living me, straightened my limbs and covered my face. And then, the main event. The vultures descended. They arrived not as a unified flock, but as separate, rival carrion birds, each circling from a different direction, each expecting to be the first to claim the prime piece of meat. Astrid was first, of course, efficiency personified. Her sleek, black town car crunched on the gravel drive precisely 23 minutes after the doctor's call. She didn't rush. She never rushed. Rushing was for the unprepared. She strode into the house, her black designer coat cutting a severe line against the muted colors of the hallway. Her face was a perfect study in controlled grief, a slight tightening around the mouth, a purposeful dullness in the eyes. It was the expression of a CEO announcing disappointing quarterly earnings, not a daughter who had just lost her father. She bypassed my room entirely. Of course she did. The body was irrelevant. The estate was the priority. She went straight to my study, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm of ownership on the hardwood. She stood behind my desk, her hands resting on the leather blotter, surveying her new kingdom. I could feel her mind working, a cold, humming supercomputer already running asset valuation algorithms. Bjorn arrived next, not in a car, but on foot. A calculated choice. He lived in the guest cottage on the far edge of the property. A perk he'd granted him, a last temporary setback, a failed speculative venture that smelled distinctly of fraud, though nothing was ever proven. Had been waiting, watching Astrid's arrival from his window. His entrance was a masterpiece of performative concern. He burst through the front door, his hair artfully disheveled, his eyes wide with what looked like genuine anguish. "Brenda, my God, is it true?" he cried, his voice cracking with just the right amount of emotion. He didn't wait for an answer, rushing past her and taking the stairs two at a time, a son desperate to see his departed father. The performance was for Brenda's benefit, for the universe's benefit. He knew I was gone, had known the moment Astrid's car had pulled in. This was about establishing the narrative. Bjorn, the heartbroken son, versus Astrid, the cold, corporate shark. He entered my room, slowing his pace. He approached the bed, and to my surprise, a genuine tremor did seem to go through him. He looked down at my covered face, and for a fleeting second, the politician's mask slipped. There was a boy there, my boy, the one who used to follow me around the shipyard, his eyes full of wonder. Then it was gone, swallowed by the man. He reached out a hand, not to touch me, but to adjust the sheet, a neat, proprietary gesture. "Oh, Father," he whispered, a sound meant to be overheard. "What will we do without you?" Clara's arrival was an event. Her husband, Julian, drove their antiquated, slightly dented Jaguar up the drive at a reckless speed, scattering gravel like shotgun pellets. The car hadn't come to a complete stop before Clara flung the door open and stumbled out. She was a symphony of grief, dressed in head-to-toe black that looked suspiciously new. She was already weeping. Great, heaving sobs that shook her entire frame. Julian trailed behind her, a pale, anxious ghost clutching a silk handkerchief that was more for show than for use. She didn't go to the study. She didn't go to my room. She collapsed in the grand foyer, at the foot of the staircase, as if the weight of her sorrow had physically felled her. "Daddy," she wailed, the word echoing through the cavernous house. No, not my daddy. It was a performance worthy of a daytime soap opera, and it was utterly effective. Brenda rushed to her side, making comforting clucking noises, completely taken in. Clara wasn't thinking about valuations or assets. She was establishing herself as the primary mourner, the one who felt the loss most deeply, and therefore by the twisted logic of her world, the one who deserved the most. The three heirs were in the house. The stage was set, and they hadn't even spoken to each other yet. The first interaction was a masterpiece of subtext. Astrid, hearing the commotion, emerged from the study, her expression one of profound irritation. She stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at the scene of her sister prostrate on the marble floor. "For God's sake, Clara, get up," Astrid said, her voice cutting through Clara's sobs like a scalpel. "You're making a spectacle of yourself." Clara looked up, her face a tragic mask of mascara street misery. "How can you be so cold? Hay's gone. Our father is gone." "I am aware," Astrid said coldly, "which is why we need to be focused, not hysterical. Brenda, help her up. We'll need to make arrangements." Bjorn appeared behind Astrid, the perfect intermediary. "Astrid, please. A little compassion. She's grieving." He came down the stairs and knelt beside Clara, putting a brotherly arm around her. "It's a shock for all of us, Clara. We're all devastated." He shot a look at Astrid that said, "See, this is how it's done." Astrid's lips tightened into a thin, bloodless line. She saw through Bjorn's act, just as he saw through hers. Clara, however, soaked up his attention, her sobs subsiding into hiccuping gulps. "He loved this house, Bjorn," she whimpered. "He would have wanted it to stay in the family." And there it was, the first shot across the bow. Not 5 minutes after my death, the battle lines were being drawn over real estate. The estate, Astrid corrected, emphasizing the word, is a collection of assets. Sentimentality has no place in its management. "We will do what is most financially prudent." "Prudent," Clara cried, her voice rising again. "This is our home, Mother's home. It's not an asset." "Everything is an asset, Clara," Astrid said, her tone final. "Even your tears, though have yet to determine their market value." She turned and walked back into the study, closing the door with a soft, definitive click. Bjorn helped Clara to her feet. "Don't mind her," he murmured. "You know how she is. We'll do what's right for the family. We'll honor Father's wishes." He said the words with such soothing conviction that even I, a disembodied spirit privy to his every calculation, almost believed him. The next 24 hours were a blur of grim ritual and thinly veiled hostility. The funeral home was called. My body was taken away. Flowers began to arrive. Great, fragrant mounds of them, their cloying sweetness doing little to cover the smell of tension that permeated the house. The three of them moved through the motions of planning my funeral like a dysfunctional board of directors. Astrid wanted a simple, efficient service at the city crematorium, cost-effective and dignified, she stated. Clara, predictably, wanted a full Catholic Mass at the cathedral, followed by a horse-drawn carriage procession to the family mausoleum. It's what Mother would have wanted. It's about respect. Bjorn, ever the diplomat, brokered a compromise, a service at the large non-denominational chapel near the estate, to accommodate the wide range of Father's associates. It was a brilliant move. It appeared conciliatory, but his real motive was clear. The chapel could hold hundreds, a perfect venue for him to network and be seen as the grieving, capable son at the center of the powerful Vestergaard family. I watched it all, this dance of death and decorum. I saw Astrid on her laptop in the corner, already firing off emails to our financial team with the subject line estate liquidation analysis. I saw Bjorn on the phone, his voice low and serious, saying things like, "It's a terrible loss, yes, a great man will have to see where the chips fall. But you know I've always valued our partnership." I saw Clara drifting through the rooms, touching objects of Ace, a framed photograph, a small bronze sculpture as if mentally tagging them for herself. "Julian, look," she'd whisper. "This was Mother's. She'd want me to have it." They were like players on a chessboard, moving their pieces, each convinced they were the grandmother. They had no idea the board itself was a trick. The funeral was a society event. The great and the good of the city came, their faces arranged in expressions of solemn respect, their eyes sharp with curiosity. They were there to pay their respects, yes, but also to take the temperature of the heirs, to see who was in charge, to look for cracks. Astrid was stoic and dry-eyed, accepting condolences with a firm handshake and a curt nod. She was the picture of strength. Bjorn was the opposite. He was everywhere, clasping shoulders, sharing a quiet, sad laugh, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He was the picture of heart. Clara was the spectacle, veiled in black, supported by a grim-faced Julian, so overcome at the coffin that she had to be helped back to her pew. She was the picture of loss. They played their parts perfectly. The audience was captivated. And then, it was over. The last of the guests drifted away. The flowers began to wilt. The three of them returned to the empty, echoing house. The performance ended. Now, it was time for business. William Henderson arrived the next morning at 10 o'clock sharp. He looked older, wearier, the weight of his duty heavy on his stooped shoulders. He carried a simple leather briefcase. Inside it was the bomb. He gathered them in my study, the room where he'd conceived this entire endgame. Astrid sat in my chair, behind the desk, claiming the position of power. Bjorn took one of the client chairs, angling it slightly to appear both engaged and relaxed. Clara sat on the leather sofa, a distance away, as if too emotional to get close to the brutal mechanics of law. Henderson didn't sit. He remained standing, placing the briefcase on the desk. The air was thick with anticipation. I could feel their greed, a physical heat radiating from them. Astrid, Bjorn, Clara. Henderson began, his voice gravelly and tired. I am sorry for your loss. Arthur was my friend for a very long time. He was a unique man. Get on with it, William, Astrid said, her impatience barely veiled. We're aware of the loss. We need to understand the logistics. Henderson gave her a look that would have frozen a lesser woman. He was one of the few people intimidated by Astrid Vestergaard. He slowly unlatched the briefcase and withdrew a single document, the will. The paper seemed to crackle with energy in the quiet room. This is the last will and testament of Arthur Denmark Vestergaard, he intoned, dated 6 months ago. It revokes all previous wills and codicils. He started reading the standard boilerplate. I left bequests to Brenda, a generous sum that would allow her to retire comfortably, a donation to the local seamen's charity, a few specific items to old friends. They listened, impatient, waiting for the main course. Then, Henderson cleared his throat. He adjusted his glasses. This was it. And now, the disposition of the residue of my estate, he read, his voice gaining a firmer, more deliberate tone. I give, devise, and bequeath all the rest, residue, and remainder of my property, of whatsoever kind and character, and wheresoever situated, to my children, Astrid, Bjorn, and Clara, in equal shares. Absolutely and in fee simple. I could see them lean forward, almost imperceptibly. Astrid's shoulders relaxed a fraction. Bjorn's smile began to dawn. Clara let out a soft sigh of relief. Equal shares. It was what they expected. It was fair. It was boring. Henderson continued, without pausing. Provided, however, and upon the condition that they shall unanimously agree upon a specific and binding plan for the division and distribution of said property within 1 calendar month from the date of my death. The room went absolutely still. The only sound was the faint tick of the 19th century carriage clock on the mantelpiece. Unanimously agree. The words hung in the air, strange and alien. Henderson wasn't finished. He delivered the coup de grace. Should my said children fail to reach such a unanimous agreement within the stipulated time period, then and in that event, the entirety of the residuary estate shall pour over into the Clara Vestergaard Foundation for the Arts, to be used for its general charitable purposes. He stopped reading. The silence that followed was deafening. It was the silence of 3 minds simultaneously trying to process a mathematical impossibility. Clara broke it first. Her brain, the simplest of the 3, was the first to short-circuit. I don't understand, she whispered, her brow furrowed. What does that mean? Unanimously. We just get it, don't we? Astrid's face had gone from cold to glacial. Her eyes were fixed on Henderson, sharp enough to cut diamond. It's a conditional bequest, she said, her voice low and dangerous. A trick clause. It means we don't get a damn thing unless we all agree on how to split it. Every last asset. The house, the stocks, the art, the patents, everything. And if we don't, it all goes to that foundation. She spat the last word as if it were a curse. Bjorn was very still. The politician's smile was gone, replaced by a look of intense, focused calculation. He was the first to truly grasp the elegant horror of it. He started to laugh. It was a dry, hollow, utterly mirthless sound. My God, he breathed, a look of genuine admiration flickering in his eyes. The old bastard. Hayes done it. Hayes finally, truly done it. Done what? Clara cried, her confusion tipping into panic. What has he done? Hayes rigged the game, Bjorn said, shaking his head in a kind of awe. Hayes given us the keys to the kingdom, but Hayes locked the door and thrown the keys into a pit of snakes. To get them, we have to all hold hands and walk in together, and we have 1 month. The reality began to dawn on Clara's face, the sheer scale of the trap. Her eyes widened in horror. But we never agree on anything. Never. He knew that. Precisely, Astrid said, her voice dripping with venom. She stood up, leaning her knuckles on the desk. William, this is absurd. It's punitive. It's insane. He wasn't of sound mind. We can challenge this. We will challenge this. Henderson remained impassive. He was of perfectly sound mind, Astrid. I had him independently evaluated before he signed. By 2 separate psychiatrists. Their reports are in the file. He was, in their words, exceptionally sharp, lucid, and possessed of a formidable and cunning intelligence. He knew exactly what he was doing. It's a paradox. Astrid snapped. It's unenforceable. It is neither. Henderson replied calmly. The condition is clear. The time frame is clear. The consequence of failure is clear. The law favors the distribution of assets according to a will's terms, even if those terms are challenging. Your father was a master of complex contracts. This is merely his final one. But we have to agree on everything. Clara wailed. What about the house? I want the house. I need it. And I need the controlling interest in the company, Astrid said coldly. The shares can't be split 3 ways. It would destabilize everything. And I, Bjorn said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face, have my own ideas about the value of certain relationships and assets. The art collection, for instance. It's not just about monetary value. It's about influence. They were already talking past each other, their individual, irreconcilable demands bubbling to the surface. The trap was sprung, and they had leapt right into it. Henderson watched them for a moment, a faint trace of pity in his old eyes. He reached into his briefcase and laid a thick stack of documents on the desk. These are the preliminary inventories: real estate, securities, business interests, tangible personal property. You have 1 month. The clock started ticking at the moment of your father's death. I suggest you begin. He turned and walked out of the study, leaving the 3 of them alone with the bomb I had left for them. The silence he left behind was explosive. Astrid was the first to move. She snatched the inventory list for Vestergaard Maritime Holdings. Her eyes scanned the numbers, her lips moving slightly. The non-voting shares are one thing, but the voting block, it has to be consolidated. It's the only way to maintain stability. Stability for whom, Astrid? Bjorn asked smoothly, picking up the inventory for the real estate. For you. You've been trying to dilute my stake for years. I'm not agreeing to anything that gives you unilateral control. Your stake, Astrid scoffed, not looking up from the paper. You mean the stake father gifted you? You nearly bankrupted yourself with that ridiculous casino scheme in Macau. You've never contributed a day's real work to this company. I contribute in ways your spreadsheet mind can't comprehend. Bjorn shot back, his smile tight. Relationships, access, things you bulldoze through with all the grace of a cargo ship. Stop it, Clara shrieked, grabbing the list of personal effects. Just stop. Why are you talking about stocks and ships? What about the things? What about mother's jewelry? Her porcelain? This stuff is what matters. This is our family. This is our history. That stuff, Clara, Astrid said, finally looking at her with utter contempt. is valued at over $15 million. It is not a toy box for you to rummage through. It is a highly liquidatable asset class. Liquidate. Clara's voice rose to a hysterical pitch. You want to sell Mother's things. You want to sell her memory. I won't allow it. I'll never agree to that. Never. Then you'll get nothing. Astrid roared, slamming her hand on the desk. The carriage clock jumped. None of us will. Is that what you want? To let it all go to a bunch of grubby little children, whole finger paints over our portraits? Maybe that's what he wanted. Clara screamed back, tears streaming down her face. Maybe he knew we were a family of monsters, and had rather give it to strangers. Bjorn watched them, saying nothing. The initial shock had worn off, and the strategist in him was taking over. He saw the deadlock, he saw the impasse, and he saw his opportunity. In any negotiation, the mediator holds the power. Ladies, please, he said, his voice a calming balm. This is exactly what Father anticipated. He's pitting us against each other. He's watching us from hell, having a good laugh. Are we going to give him the satisfaction? He let the question hang in the air. Astrid and Clara fell silent, glaring at each other, but listening. We have a month, Bjorn continued, spreading his hands. A month is a long time. We are all reasonable people. He ignored Astrid's derisive snort. We all want what's best for the family legacy. We just have different perspectives on what that is. What are you suggesting? Astrid asked. Her eyes narrowed. I'm suggesting we do this properly, Bjorn said. We form a committee. We meet here every day. We go through these inventories line by line. We each make our lists of what's most important to us. We negotiate. We compromise. It sounded so reasonable, so mature, so utterly impossible. Compromise, Clara said, sniffing. You mean, let Astrid have the company, and you have the art and I get what? The crumbs, the leftover furniture. No one gets everything they want, Clara, Bjorn said gently. That's the nature of a compromise. But if we work together, we can all get something. The alternative is getting nothing. Is your pride worth $300 million? It was the first time anyone had said the number out loud. It hung in the room, vast and suffocating. $300 million. The price of their unanimity. Astrid looked at the inventory in her hand, then at her siblings. Her calculating mind was weighing the odds. She knew Bjorn was manipulating them, but he was also right. The numbers were too big to ignore. Fine, she said curtly. We meet, we negotiate, but I'm setting the agenda. We start with the corporate assets. They are the most complex and have the most moving parts. We start with the personal effects, Clara insisted, clutching the list to her chest. They're the simplest. We can get through them quickly. The corporate assets, Astrid repeated, her voice leaving no room for argument. How about we start with the real estate? Bjorn interjected smoothly. It's a tangible asset class we can all understand. The house, the Hamptons property, the Aspen Lodge. It's a good middle ground. They were already stuck on step one. Where to begin? I watched, a silent spectator to my own revenge. The first meeting of the Vestergaard Estate Division Committee did 3 hours. They didn't agree on a single thing. Not the agenda, not the order of assets, not even whether to have coffee or tea brought in. Astrid presented a color-coded spreadsheet outlining a proposed division of the company shares, a plan that conveniently consolidated all power in her hands, while offering Bjorn and Clara a slightly inflated cash buyout of their non-strategic holdings. Bjorn laughed it off and counter-proposed a trust structure that would hold the assets for 10 years, with him as the sole trustee, empowered to manage the portfolio for the benefit of all. A proposition that made Astrid's eye twitch. Clara refused to discuss any of it until they promised her the house and its entire contents to preserve the family heritage. When they pointed out that the house alone was worth $40 million, making her share vastly disproportionate, she burst into tears and accused them of bullying her. They broke for the day, exhausted, furious, and no closer to unanimity than they had been at the start. Day 2 was worse. They brought in their lawyers. The room, once my sanctum, was now a war room. Astrid's lawyer, a sharp-faced woman with the demeanor of a hawk, argued points of corporate law and fiduciary duty. Bjorn's lawyer, a sleek, expensive-looking man who smelled of expensive cologne, talked about equitable distribution and sentimental value. Clara's lawyer, a nervous-looking young man who seemed terrified of his own client, mostly just nodded while Clara talked over him. The language became more hostile. Terms like unconscionable, bad faith, and potential litigation were thrown around. Day 3. The arguments grew more personal. The old wounds ripped open. You always were his favorite, Astrid, because you were just as cold and empty as he was. Clara screamed. And you were the useless doll mother coddled. And you've done nothing with your life but spend other people's money. Astrid retorted. And you, Bjorn. Clara turned on him. You slimy weasel, you've been playing both sides against the middle since we were children. You probably knew about this will and didn't tell us. Don't be ridiculous, Clara, Bjorn said, though a flicker in his eyes suggested the idea had at least crossed his mind. I watched them unravel. The polished fods they presented to the world cracked and peeled away, revealing the raw, grasping need beneath. The civilized negotiation had devolved into a bare-knuckled brawl over the spoils. A week passed. The month was bleeding away. They had made zero progress. The sheer scale of the estate was itself a weapon I had wielded against them. It was too big, too complex. The number of assets was overwhelming. How do you unanimously agree on the division of a 17th-century Dutch masterpiece? A block of midtown commercial real estate. A patent for a maritime navigation system. They couldn't. They spent days arguing over a single painting, a minor Renoir that Clara had loved. Astrid wanted it sold at auction. Bjorn wanted it donated to the Metropolitan Museum and his name for the tax write-off and social capital. Clara claimed it spoke to her soul, and she would die before she let it leave the family. They were bogged down in the quagmire of their own desires. The foundation, my foundation, loomed larger with each passing day, a spectre of their failure. Bjorn, ever the adaptable creature, realized the brute force approach wasn't working. He changed tactics. He started meeting with his siblings individually, late at night, in corners of the house. He found Clara in the conservatory, crying over an orchid. Clara, listen to me, he said, his voice soft, conspiratorial. Astrid will never let you have the house. You know that. She'll see it as a $60 million asset sitting idle. She'll force a sale. I can't live without this house, Bjorn, she whimpered. It's all I have. What if you didn't have two? He whispered. What if you and we form a pact? We agree on a division that gives you the house. All of it. Free and clear. Clara's eyes widened. And what would you want? My share, Bjorn said. In other things. The Aspen Lodge. The art collection. The cash equivalents. You get the house and its contents. I get my pick of the rest. Astrid gets the company and the rest of the liquid assets. It's clean. Simple. It was a brilliant, devious move. He was offering Clara her heart's desire. And in return, he would get a king's ransom of the most valuable, prestigious assets. He was cutting Astrid out of the things she cared less about, appeasing her with the company she craved, and making himself obscenely wealthy and powerful in the process. And it required only 2 votes, his and Clara's. They could force Astrid to agree by presenting a united front. It was a subversion of my plan. Unanimity through a bilateral coup. Clara, through her tears, saw it. A path to getting what she wanted. She nodded, slowly at first, then with increasing desperation. Yes, okay. The house is mine. You promise? I promise, Bjorn said, kissing her forehead. Well, present it to Astrid tomorrow. She'll have no choice. He left her then, and I could feel the smug satisfaction rolling off him. Had done it. Had found the loophole. Had broken the paradox. The next morning, over a tense breakfast, Bjorn laid out his proposal. He was calm, confident. Astrid, Clara, and I have reached an understanding. We believe this is a fair and equitable distribution that plays to each of our strengths and desires. He slid a piece of paper across the table. Astrid picked it up, her eyes scanning the terms. Her face, already pale, went utterly white. She saw it immediately. She saw herself getting the company, yes, but also saw Bjorn walking away with a collection of assets whose total value arguably exceeded the company itself, not to mention the social cachet, and Clara getting the crown jewel, the estate itself, for nothing but her tears. She crumpled the paper in her fist. "You conniving son of a bitch," she breathed, her voice shaking with rage. "You think you can go behind my back and carve up the estate between you? You think I'm just going to accept the scraps?" "They're not scraps, Astrid," Bjorn said calmly. "You get what you've always wanted. Total control of Vestergaard Maritime. And you get to be the fucking Medici," she shouted, standing up so fast her chair screeched backwards. "The art, the properties, the cash. And she gets a $60 million mansion to weep in. This is not equitable. This is a betrayal." "It's a compromise," Bjorn said, his smile fading. "It's the only one on the table. Clara agrees with me. That's 2 votes. You can either agree with us, or you can watch it all go to charity. Your choice." He had backed her into a corner. He was using my own trap against her. Agree, or get nothing. I watched Astrid's mind race. She was trapped. To get the company, she had to let them rob the rest of the estate blind. The injustice of it burned her more than the loss itself. Her sense of order, of fairness, her ruthless, mathematical fairness, was being violated. She looked at Clara, who was watching her with a mixture of hope and fear. "You'd side with him?" Astrid asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "After everything, you'd let him play you like a fiddle? He doesn't care about you, Clara. He's using you to get what he wants. He's giving me the house." Clara shot back. "You just want to sell it. It's not about the house," Astrid roared. "It's about the value. The value, you stupid girl. He's taking assets worth twice what this house is worth. He's playing you for a fool." "I don't care about the value," Clara screamed. "I care about Mother's memory. You wouldn't understand that. You have a calculator for a heart." The bilateral alliance, forged in secret, was crumbling in the harsh light of day under Astrid's furious assault. "Fine," Astrid said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You want to play it this way? Let's play." She turned her icy gaze on Bjorn. "You think you're so clever? You think you have the votes? Let's see you try." She walked out of the room, pulling out her phone. I drifted closer, listening. "Alan," she said to her lawyer, "it's Astrid. I want you to file an emergency motion, temporary injunction. I want the entire estate frozen. I'm alleging undue influence and fraud in the execution of the will. No, I don't have evidence yet, but I have a brother who's been living on the property 4 years, whispering in my father's ear. I want it investigated. I want everything stopped until we get to the bottom of it." She was fighting back. She was going to litigate. She was going to blow the whole thing up. The paradox held. Unanimity was farther away than ever. The clock kept ticking. 10 days gone. 20 left. And from my unique vantage point, I allowed myself a silent, spectral laugh. It was even more beautiful than I had imagined. The silence after Astrid's declaration wasn't just an absence of sound, it was a new element in the room, heavy and charged, like the air before a lightning strike. Bjorn and Clara stood frozen, the crumpled paper of their would-be coup lying on the floor between them like a dead thing. Astrid's threat wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of nuclear war. She wasn't just refusing to play the game, she was going to burn the entire board. I watched, a phantom at the feast of their own making, and I felt a thrill that was colder and sharper than any he'd known in life. This was the crescendo. This was the beautiful, catastrophic failure I had orchestrated. Bjorn was the first to break the spell. The politician's mask, which had slipped into a moment of genuine shock, snapped back into place, but it was tighter now, strained at the edges. "An injunction, Astrid," he said, his voice a low, controlled hum of fury. "Undue influence. That's not just a challenge. That's professional suicide for you. The scandal would tank the company's stock. You'd be destroying the very thing you claim to want to protect. I'd rather see it burn than watch you and the weeping willow here pick its bones," Astrid hissed, her finger stabbing toward Clara, who flinched as if struck. "You think I don't know what you've been doing? The loans from father's personal accounts, that were never repaid. The consulting fees for your useless connections. I have files, Bjorn. I have records. If you want to play dirty, we can play very, very dirty. Clara found her voice, a thin, reedy wail. Why are you doing this? We had a solution. A way out. You had a way to be his puppet. Astrid corrected, her eyes never leaving Bjorn. He offered you a shiny toy to make you dance, and you were ready to hand him the keys to the kingdom. You're even more of a fool than I thought. The bilateral alliance, so fragile, so selfishly conceived, shattered completely. Clara looked at Bjorn, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt appeared through the veil of her self-pity. Had he been using her? The thought was a tiny, poisonous seed, but Astrid had planted it deep. This is counterproductive, Bjorn said, shifting tactics, trying to reclaim the role of the reasonable mediator. We're wasting time. The clock is ticking. Throwing around accusations of fraud helps no one. It just ensures the Foundation wins. Maybe the Foundation should win, Astrid shouted, and the words echoed in the high-ceilinged room, shocking even her. She looked momentarily stunned by her own outburst, then her expression hardened into something even more resolute. Maybe that's what he truly wanted. Maybe he looked at the three of us and decided a pack of squabbling strangers would do a better job with his legacy than his own children. It was the first true thing any of them had said since I died. The unvarnished, ugly truth of my final judgment. The room fell silent again. The truth, once spoken, has a weight that silences even the most furious lies. The day devolved into a cold war. Astrid retreated to the library, her phone glued to her ear, issuing quiet, frantic commands to her legal team. The word injunction was whispered like a curse. Bjorn disappeared, presumably to his cottage to marshal his own defenses, to call in every favor, to find a way to shield himself from Astrid's coming legal onslaught. Clara wandered the house like a ghost, touching the walls, the banisters, as if trying to memorize them before they were torn away from her forever. The shared goal of securing the inheritance had been completely subsumed by their individual agendas. Astrid's to destroy Bjorn, Bjorn's to survive Astrid's attack, and Clara's to mourn the loss of a future she felt entitled to. My paradox had done its work. It had turned them from reluctant allies into active adversaries. The next week was a study in mutually assured destruction. Astrid's lawyers filed the motion. The news, as these things do, leaked. A small, juicy item appeared in the financial press. Vestergaard heirs in legal spat over shipping magnates' billions. The word spat made it sound trivial, but the damage was done. Vestergaard maritime stock dipped, not precipitously, but enough to show up on a chart. A tremor of instability. Bjorn's countermove was swift and brutal. He didn't fight the injunction directly. Instead, he gave an anonymous, off-the-record interview to a society gossip columnist. The next day, a column was published, dripping with innuendo, about a certain ruthless CEO daughter of a recently deceased tycoon, who was so power-hungry she was willing to destroy her own family's legacy and name rather than share it with her siblings. It didn't name Astrid, but it didn't have to. Everyone knew. The battle was no longer contained within the walls of the house. It was now a public spectacle. Their shame, their greed, was entertainment for the world. Elara would have been mortified. I watched it all. This glorious, terrible unraveling. The house, once a home, was now a bunker in a war zone. They avoided each other. Meals were taken separately. Communication was conducted through terse, formal emails from their lawyers. The only thing they shared was a mounting, panicked awareness of the calendar. 2 weeks left, then 10 days. The pressure began to warp them, to sand away the last of their civilized veneers. Astrid, who prided herself on icy control, became brittle, paranoid. She started working from the house, her temporary command center, and he'd see her at 3 in the morning, still at the library desk, her face illuminated by the cold glow of her laptop, surrounded by financial statements and legal briefs. The circles under her eyes darkened. She wasn't just fighting for the company anymore. She was fighting for her identity, which was, and had always been synonymous with winning. Bjorn, the master manipulator, found his web of influence straining. The scandal made people nervous. His calls were less readily returned. His charm began to look desperate, his smiles more like grimaces. He started drinking more, alone in his cottage, the facade of the smooth operator cracking to reveal the anxious, insecure man beneath, the one who had always been trying to prove he was more than just the favored, but ultimately lesser, son. And Clara broke. The pressure was too much for her architecture of fragility, the reality that the house, her mother's memory, her entire imagined future, could vanish not because of a mean sister, but because of a legal document she couldn't manipulate with tears, was a truth too solid for her to bear. She stopped eating. She took to her old childhood room, lying in the dark 4 hours, not crying, just staring at the ceiling. Julian fluttered around her, useless and increasingly irritated, his own plans for a life of subsidized leisure evaporating before his eyes. With 5 days left, a forced truce was called. Henderson summoned them. He looked older, wearier, the burden of being the executor of this disaster visibly weighing on him. They gathered in the study, the same room where had read the will. They looked like survivors of a shipwreck, hollow-eyed, pale, radiating a toxic mixture of exhaustion and hatred. "This has gone far enough," Henderson said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "The public litigation, the anonymous briefings, it's a disgrace to your father's memory. She started it," Clara mumbled, not looking at anyone. "He forced my hand," Astrid said coldly, glaring at Bjorn. "I was defending myself against baseless, malicious accusations," Bjorn retorted. Henderson held up a hand. "I don't care. The fact remains, you have less than a week. The court will not grant an injunction to stop a conditional bequest based on the specious grounds you've presented, Astrid. Your motion will be denied. The clock will not stop." Astrid's shoulders slumped a fraction. It was her last gambit, and he had just declared it a failure. "So, that's it," Bjorn said, a hollow laugh escaping him. "We just let it go. After all this, unless you can find a way to agree," Henderson said, stating the obvious with brutal simplicity. "Your father's condition was unanimity, not majority, not a consensus brokered by lawyers, unanimous agreement, on everything." The impossibility of it finally, truly landed on them, not as a concept, but as a physical reality. They looked at each other, not with hatred now, but with a kind of horrified realization. They saw their own reflections in each other's exhausted faces. They saw the same stubborn, greedy, self-destructive will. "They saw me. He knew," Clara whispered, her voice raw. "He knew we couldn't do it." "Of course he knew," Astrid said. And for the first time, there was no heat in her words, only a vast, empty exhaustion. It was the point. There was a long silence. The fight had gone out of them. They were bankrupt. "There might be one way," Bjorn said slowly, the words dragged out of him as if by force. They both looked at him. There was no hope in their eyes, only a weary suspicion. "We don't have to agree on the division of each individual asset," he said, his mind, ever the strategist's, working even in defeat. "The will says a specific and binding plan for the division. It doesn't specify the methodology." "Get to the point, Bjorn," Astrid sighed. "We agree to let a neutral third party do it," he said. "An arbitrator, a judge even. We all three unanimously agree to abide by their decision. Whatever it is, we sign a binding agreement to that effect. That is our plan. We agree to let someone else decide." It was a clever, desperate Hail Mary. A workaround, a technicality. It was the last gasp of a mind that refused to accept total defeat. Astrid considered it. I could see the pros and cons flashing behind her eyes. Pro: she might still get the company. Con: she might not. Pro: it would prevent the total loss. Con: it would mean ceding control, the thing she valued most in the world. Clara looked bewildered. A stranger would decide who gets mother's necklace, who gets the house. It's that, or a bunch of grubby children get it all. "Clara," Bjorn said, his patience thin, "which would you prefer?" She shrunk back into herself, silent. We'd have to agree on the arbitrator, Astrid said, her lawyer's mind engaging with the problem. That in itself could take weeks. We have days. We have Henderson, Bjorn said, gesturing to the old man. He's neutral. He knew father better than anyone. We unanimously agree to let William decide. Right here, right now. They all looked at Henderson, who looked profoundly uncomfortable. I am the executor, not arbitrator, he said. My duty is to execute the will's terms, not to create new ones. You'd be executing the terms, Bjorn insisted, a frantic energy in his voice. We'd be giving you a unanimous agreement to let you divide it. You'd be the instrument of our plan. It fits the clause. It has too. It was their last chance. A pathetic, last-ditch effort to cheat the paradox. I watched them, these three broken people, turning to the one adult in the room to save them from themselves. The irony was so rich I could taste it. Astrid looked at Bjorn, then at Clara, then at Henderson. She gave a short, sharp nod. I agree. I will abide by William's division. Bjorn nodded eagerly. I agree. Unanimously. They both looked at Clara. She was the key, the final vote. She looked from one to the other, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. This was too abstract for her. She couldn't manipulate an arbitrator. She couldn't guilt-trip a process. She wanted promises. She wanted guarantees. The house, she whispered. I need to know about the house, Clara. For God's sake. Astrid exploded. The brief moment of cohesion shattered. There are no guarantees. That's the point. It's this or nothing. But it's not fair. Clara wailed, collapsing back into her default setting. I need the house. It's not a want. It's a need. He would have wanted me to have it. And there it was. The fatal flaw. The unbridgeable chasm. Clara could not, would not, agree to anything unless it contained the pre-approved outcome of her getting the house. She demanded her certainty, and in demanding it, she destroyed the last possible chance for any certainty at all. Astrid stared at her, and the fight finally, completely, went out of her. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked relieved. Okay, she said softly. Okay, Clara, you win. She turned to Henderson. It seems we are unable to reach a unanimous agreement. Thank you for your time, William. She turned and walked out of the study. She didn't slam the door. She closed it softly, with a finality that was more devastating than any rage. Bjorn looked at Clara, a look of utter, contemptuous disgust on his face. He didn't say a word. He just shook his head slowly, turned, and followed Astrid out. Clara was left alone with Henderson. She looked confused. What happened? Did we agree? Henderson looked at her with an expression of profound pity. No, Clara, he said gently. You didn't. The final days were an anticlimax. The clock ticked down to 0. There were no more meetings, no more arguments, no more desperate strategies. The war was over. They had lost. The house was filled with the silence of surrender. On the morning of the 30th day, Henderson returned. He gathered them one last time in the study. They stood apart from each other, strangers bound by blood and failure. The time period stipulated in the last will and testament of Arthur Denmark Vestergaard has now elapsed, he said, his voice formal and empty. As you have failed to reach a unanimous agreement on a plan for the division of the estate, the condition of the bequest has not been met. Accordingly, the entirety of the residuary estate is hereby transferred to the Clara Vestergaard Foundation for the Arts. My work as executor is complete. He placed a single sheet of paper on the desk. The legal confirmation of the transfer nodded once, and left. There was nothing left to say. I watched them. Astrid stood straight, her face a mask of stoic acceptance. She had lost, but she had lost on her terms, refusing to capitulate. She would return to her company, wounded but unbowed, to rebuild her empire alone. Bjorn's shoulders were slumped, the charm finally, completely gone, replaced by the weary slump of a man who had played his last hand and lost. He was diminished, and he knew it. His currency of influence was devalued forever. And Clara, she finally understood. The reality, cold and hard and absolute, finally pierced the fog of her self-absorption. It was gone. All of it. The house, the silver, the paintings, the jewelry. The stage for her grief was being taken away. There would be no generous allowance. Julian would leave her. The life she knew was over. A low, guttural moan escaped her, a sound of pure, animal loss. Then she began to scream, not in performance, but in genuine, unbearable agony. She collapsed to the floor, and this time, no one came to help her up. They left the house that day, for the last time. Astrid's car pulled away, swift and efficient. Bjorn walked back to his cottage to pack his things, a man without a country. Clara was eventually led away, sobbing hysterically, by a stony-faced Julian. The house was empty, silent, mine, and then something shifted. The profound silence was broken by a new sound. The front door opened, not with a hesitant creak, but with a purposeful push. A group of people entered. They were young, dressed casually. They carried clipboards and measuring tapes. They were from the foundation. They talked in bright, eager voices, their words echoing in the empty spaces. The main hall will be perfect for the recitals. We can use this room for the smaller ensembles. The acoustics in here are incredible. They were followed by children, a dozen or so, wide-eyed and curious, shepherded by a smiling woman. They were part of the Foundation's first outreach program. A tour, a glimpse into their new future. A little girl, no more than 8, broke away from the group. She wandered into my study. She looked at the empty desk, the bare bookshelves. She didn't see the ghost of a bitter old man. She didn't see a battlefield of greed. She saw a big, empty, interesting room. She walked over to the grand piano that had stood untouched for years, a monument to a dead woman's taste. Clara had never played it. Astrid had considered it an inefficient use of space. Bjorn had seen it as a symbol of a culture he could never quite buy into. The little girl, her fingers grubby from her journey, gently pressed down on a key. A single, clear, perfect middle C note rang out through the silent house. It hung in the air, pure and hopeful, washing away the echoes of argument, the whispers of conspiracy, the screams of loss. She smiled, a bright, uncomplicated thing, and pressed another key, and then another. A clumsy, simple, beautiful melody began to fill the void where my family had failed. I looked around my empty study, at the sunlight streaming through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. I listened to the child's song, a sound this house had not heard in decades. The paradoxical will had done its work. It had exposed my children for who they were. It had broken them. It had cost them everything. But as I listened to that simple, joyful music echoing through the halls of my home, a strange feeling settled over me. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't triumph. It was peace. The Foundation had its money. The children had their music. The house had its life back. And I had my revenge. And it was finally, absolutely, complete. The last note of the child's song faded away. She laughed, a sound like bells, and ran out of the room to join her friends. The silence that returned was different now. It was no longer empty. It was full of promise. My work was done. I let go.